What if the stranger you risked everything to save turned out to be the judge deciding whether you'd lose your child forever? This is the incredible true story of Daniel Hayes, a single father whose split-second decision to dive into deadly waters would change not just 2 lives, but challenge everything we think we know about justice, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be a hero. Stay with me until the very end of this story, and please comment below what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale of courage has traveled around the world. The alarm shrieked through the lifeguard station at exactly 6:47 a.m., cutting through the morning mist that clung to Pacific Beach like a gray shroud. Daniel Hayes bolted upright from the wooden chair, where he'd been catching a few minutes of rest between his double shifts, his weathered hands already reaching for the rescue buoy, before his mind fully processed the emergency call crackling through the radio. Code red Sector 7. Woman in distress approximately 50 yards out. Heavy surf conditions. All units respond immediately. Daniel's bare feet hit the cold sand running. At 34, his body still moved with the fluid precision of the Marine he'd once been, every muscle memory trained for moments exactly like this. The October storm had been battering the California coast for 3 days straight, turning the usually manageable Pacific swells into towering walls of white-capped fury that even experienced swimmers avoided. Only a fool or someone with a death wish would venture into these waters. Through the driving rain and salt spray, he spotted her, a flash of dark hair, disappearing beneath a massive wave, then surfacing again, arms flailing desperately against the current that was dragging her further from shore with each passing second. She was already beyond the breaker zone, caught in the notorious riptide that had claimed 6 lives this year alone. "Jesus," Daniel muttered under his breath, his trained eye instantly calculating the odds. The water temperature was 58 degrees. In these conditions, hypothermia would set in within minutes. The victim had maybe 10 minutes of fight left in her as before exhaustion, and the cold won. He didn't hesitate. Daniel plunged into the churning surf, the shock of the icy water hitting his chest like a physical blow. Each stroke was a battle against the current that seemed determined to claim 2 victims instead of 1. Salt water filled his mouth and nose as he fought through wave after punishing wave, his rescue buoy trailing behind him like a lifeline to salvation. The woman was struggling less, now her movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated, the telltale signs of a drowning victim entering the final stage. Daniel had seen it too many times before, that terrible moment when the body begins to give up its fight for survival. Hey, stay with me," he shouted over the roar of the waves as he finally reached her. Her face was pale, lips already tinged blue with cold, but her eyes dark brown and wide with terror locked onto his with desperate hope. I can't feel my legs," she gasped, water sputtering from her mouth. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." Daniel's voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd pulled dozens of people from the edge of death. He slipped the rescue buoy under her arms, pulling her close to his chest. "Just breathe. Don't fight me. Let me do the work." The swim back to shore felt like an eternity. Each wave threatened to tear them apart, to drag them both down into the dark depths. Daniel's shoulders burned with the effort of fighting the current, while supporting the woman's dead weight. She'd lost consciousness twice during the rescue, her body going limp in his arms, before jerking back to awareness with desperate choking breaths. By the time they reached the shallows, a crowd had gathered on the beach. Paramedics were already rushing toward them with a stretcher, but Daniel couldn't wait. The woman's breathing was shallow and irregular, her pulse weak and thready beneath his fingers. "Call it in," he barked to his fellow lifeguard Tommy Rodriguez, who was standing knee-deep in the surf ready to assist. Possible drowning hypothermia, need immediate transport to Scripps Memorial. Daniel carried the woman onto the beach himself, laying her gently on the sand as the paramedics took over. Her chest barely rose and fell, and for a terrifying moment, it stopped completely. "She's not breathing," one of the paramedics shouted. Without thinking, Daniel dropped to his knees beside her, tilting her head back and checking her airway. His CPR training kicked in automatically, 30 chest compressions, 2 rescue breaths, checking for a pulse, then starting again. The crowd pressed closer, cell phone cameras capturing every desperate moment as Daniel fought to bring a stranger back from the brink of death. "Come on," he whispered between compressions, his hands working steadily on her chest. "Come on, don't give up on me now." 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Daniel's arms ached, sweat mixing with seawater on his face despite the cold morning air. He'd performed CPR countless times in training, twice in real emergencies, but never on someone who'd been under this long. Then, like a miracle, she convulsed. Water erupted from her lungs as she rolled onto her side, coughing violently but breathing on her own. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive, searching the faces above her until they settled on Daniel. "Thank you," she whispered so quietly, only he could hear. The paramedics immediately took over, checking her vitals, wrapping her in warming blankets, preparing her for transport. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, Daniel caught one last glimpse of her face. Elegant features, now pale and drawn with exhaustion, dark hair plastered to her skull, but those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to be memorizing his face. "What's your name?" she asked as they wheeled her toward the ambulance. Daniel Hayes." She nodded weakly. "I'm Cassandra Lee." The name meant nothing to Daniel at the moment. He was too focused on the adrenaline crash that always followed a rescue, the shaky feeling in his hands as his body processed what had just happened. Another life saved. Another family that wouldn't have to endure the devastating phone call that their loved one wasn't coming home. "Hell of a thing, Danny," Tommy said, as they watched the ambulance disappear down Mission Boulevard, its red lights flashing against the gray morning sky. "Woman's lucky you were here. 5 more minutes, and she'd have been fish food." Daniel nodded absently, already thinking about the paperwork he'd need to fill out the incident report that would document every detail of the rescue. But mostly, he was thinking about the text message that had come in during the chaos, a reminder about the custody hearing scheduled for next week. Another round in the endless legal battle that had been consuming his life for the past 8 months. His ex-wife Sarah wanted full custody of their 5-year-old daughter Lila. She'd remarried a successful real estate developer named Marcus Thornton and was now living in a 5-bedroom house in La Jolla with a white picket fence and a golden retriever. On paper, it looked like the perfect life for raising a child. Meanwhile, Daniel was a single father living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Pacific Beach, working multiple jobs to make ends meet, struggling to provide the kind of stability that family court judges seemed to value above all else. The irony wasn't lost on him that he could save a stranger's life without hesitation, but might not be able to save his relationship with his own daughter. "You okay, man?" Tommy asked, noticing Daniel's distant expression. "You look like someone walked over your grave." "Just tired," Daniel replied, though it was more than that. He was bone-deep exhausted from fighting battles on multiple fronts, fighting the ocean, fighting the legal system, fighting for every precious moment with Lila. Sometimes he wondered if he was fighting a war he couldn't possibly win. His phone buzzed with another text, this one from his lawyer. Elena Vasquez's deposition moved to Thursday. "Judge Lee wants to review your financial records again. This isn't looking good, Daniel. We need to talk." "Judge Lee." Daniel stared at the name on his phone screen, something nagging at the back of his mind. Where had he heard that name recently? Then it hit him like a rogue wave. The woman he'd just pulled from the ocean, the stranger whose life he'd held in his hands just moments ago, her name was Cassandra Lee. And if she was the same Judge Lee who'd been assigned to his custody case— Son of a bitch, Daniel whispered, the magnitude of the coincidence hitting him like a physical blow. He'd just saved the life of the woman who held his daughter's future in her hands. The woman who, according to his lawyer, was known throughout the family court system as Judge Ice for her rigid adherence to procedure and her tendency to favor traditional two-parent households in custody disputes. The woman who in just 1 week would decide whether Daniel Hayes was fit to continue being a father to the little girl who meant more to him than his own life. Daniel slumped against the lifeguard station, his mind reeling with the implications. In his 12 years as a lifeguard, he'd learned that the ocean had a twisted sense of humor, bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. But this was beyond coincidence. This was fate playing a hand so dramatic that even Hollywood screenwriters would have called it too unbelievable. He thought about the moment when Judge Lee Cassandra had looked into his eyes on the beach, the way she'd whispered, "Thank you," with such genuine gratitude. In that instant, she hadn't been a judge. She'd been a human being who'd almost died saved by a stranger who'd risked everything without asking questions. But would any of that matter when she put on her black robes next week? Would she remember the man who'd pulled her from the depths? Or would she only see the case file in front of her unemployed veteran? Inconsistent work history, single father, struggling to provide stability. Daniel's phone rang, interrupting his spiraling thoughts. The caller ID showed the picture that never failed to make him smile. Lila missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at the camera with chocolate cake smeared across her cheek from her 5th birthday party. "Daddy." Her voice was pure sunshine cutting through the gray morning like nothing else could. "Are you coming to my soccer game today? Coach says we're gonna beat the Purple Panthers." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, princess," Daniel said, forcing lightness into his voice that he didn't feel. "How's my favorite soccer star feeling about the big game?" "Super good. I practiced my kicks with Marcus yesterday, and he says I'm getting really good. Oh, and Mommy made me special pancakes with blueberries that look like soccer balls." The mention of Sarah's new husband sent a familiar stab of pain through Daniel's chest. Marcus Thornton was everything Daniel wasn't: wealthy, stable, available. He could afford to take time off work to attend every game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. He lived in a house where Lila had her own bedroom painted pink with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and shelves full of books and toys that Daniel could never afford on a lifeguard's salary. "That sounds awesome, Lila. I'll be there cheering for you from the sidelines." "Will you bring your really loud whistle, the one that makes all the other parents look at us?" Daniel laughed, despite everything. "I'll bring the whistle, but I'll try not to embarrass you too much in front of your teammates." "You never embarrass me, Daddy. You're the best daddy in the whole world." The simple, innocent words hit Daniel harder than any wave ever could. This little girl, this perfect, beautiful, brilliant little girl, was his entire universe. The thought of losing her, of being reduced to weekend visits and alternating holidays, was unbearable. "I love you too, princess. More than all the fish in the sea. More than all the waves on the beach. More than all the waves on the beach. More than all the stars in the sky." It was their ritual, their special way of saying goodbye that they'd developed when Lila was 3 and Daniel had to work overnight shifts. No matter what else was happening in their lives, they always had this moment. "More than all the stars in the sky," Daniel confirmed. "Now go eat those soccer ball pancakes and show those Purple Panthers what the Hayes family is made of." After Lila hung up, Daniel sat in the lifeguard station staring out at the ocean that had brought Judge Cassandra Lee into his life in the most dramatic way possible. The storm was beginning to clear patches of blue sky visible between the gray clouds, and the waves were starting to calm to their normal autumn rhythm. He thought about the moment during the rescue when he'd felt Cassandra's pulse stop beneath his fingers when she'd balanced on the knife's edge between life and death. In that instant, nothing else had mattered, not her job, not his problems, not the complex web of legal proceedings that were tearing his family apart. There had been only two human beings, one trying to save the other, connected by the most basic and powerful force in the universe: the refusal to let someone die on your watch. Would she remember that when she looked at his case file? Would she see the man who'd breathed life back into her lungs, or just another deadbeat dad trying to hang on to parental rights he didn't deserve? Daniel's radio crackled to life, interrupting his thoughts. "Base to Hayes. We've got a situation developing at the North Tower. Possible shark sighting, need you to clear the water." "Copy that," Daniel responded, grabbing his binoculars and heading back into the surf zone where a new crisis was already brewing. Because that was the thing about being a lifeguard. The ocean never stopped testing. You never gave you time to process one emergency before throwing another at you. But as he jogged down the beach toward the North Tower, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just shifted onto a completely different trajectory. The rescue of Judge Cassandra Lee would have consequences he couldn't even begin to imagine, ripple effects that would extend far beyond this gray October morning. He just had no idea whether those consequences would save his family or destroy it completely. 3 hours later, as Daniel finally clocked out for a brief break between shifts, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number near Hayes. "This is Cassandra Lee. I wanted to thank you again for what you did today. You saved my life, and I will never forget that. I'm recovering well at Scripps Memorial. Thank you for being there when I needed someone most." Daniel stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over again. The woman who held his daughter's future in her hands was lying in a hospital bed, alive because of his actions. The judge, who was known for her cold, clinical approach to family law, had just sent him a message filled with genuine human warmth. He started to type a response 6 times, then deleted each attempt. What could he possibly say? "You're welcome. Your Honor, and by the way, please don't take my daughter away from me next week." In the end, he settled for something simple. "Glad you're okay. That's what we're here for. Take care of yourself." But as he sent the message and headed home to get ready for Lila's soccer game, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the center of something much larger than a routine rescue. The ocean had thrown Judge Cassandra Lee into his path for a reason, and somehow he knew that both their lives would be forever changed by what happened next. The only question was whether that change would be salvation or catastrophe. And in exactly 7 days, when he sat across from her in that sterile courtroom, Daniel Hayes would finally learn the answer. For now, though, he had a little girl's soccer game to attend, and that was the only thing that mattered. Because no matter what else happened, no matter what legal battles lay ahead, he was still Lila's father. He was still the man who showed up, who cheered from the sidelines, who brought the really loud whistle that made all the other parents turn and look. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The storm clouds were breaking apart now, revealing glimpses of the California sun that had been hidden all morning. Daniel took it as a good sign as he headed home to change clothes, not knowing that across town, in a hospital room overlooking the Pacific, Judge Cassandra Lee was staring out at the same clearing sky and wondering if the man who'd saved her life might also hold the key to saving something in herself that she'd thought was lost forever. The wheels of justice were about to turn in ways that neither of them could possibly predict. The morning sun streaming through the hospital window felt different against Cassandra Lee's skin than any light she'd experienced in her 42 years. Perhaps it was because 12 hours ago she'd been certain she'd never feel sunlight again. The steady beep of the heart monitor reminded her that she was alive, breathing her pulse strong and regular, all thanks to a stranger who'd risked everything to pull her from the Pacific's deadly embrace. Martinez had just finished his morning rounds, pronouncing her recovery remarkable, given the severity of her hypothermia and near drowning. The lung X-rays were clear, her vital signs stable, and they'd be discharging her later that afternoon. But Cassandra felt anything but stable as she lay in the sterile hospital bed, replaying every moment of the rescue in vivid detail. She remembered the terror of feeling her strength give out the moment when the ocean had claimed her and darkness began to close in. Then strong arms had wrapped around her, a voice had cut through the chaos telling her she was going to be okay, and hands had literally brought her back from death, with steady, determined compressions against her chest. Daniel Hayes. Even his name felt different in her mind now, weighted with significance she couldn't quite process. She'd looked him up on her phone once the nurses had returned it to her, finding his lifeguard certification records, a brief mention in a local news article about a previous rescue, and a LinkedIn profile that told a story of military service dedication to ocean safety, and most unsettling of all, his current address in Pacific Beach. The same address listed in the case file that had been consuming her thoughts for weeks, Hayes v. Thornton, a custody dispute that had landed on her docket 2 months ago. She'd read through the preliminary documents 3 times each reading, reinforcing her initial assessment that Daniel Hayes was exactly the kind of unstable single father that the family court system was designed to protect children from. Unemployed veteran with PTSD. Inconsistent work history. Living in a modest apartment while working multiple low-paying jobs. Fighting for custody against an ex-wife who'd remarried into stability and could provide the kind of 2-parent household that decades of social science research showed was optimal for child development. On paper, the case had seemed straightforward. Daniel Hayes was a man who meant well, but lacked the resources and stability necessary to provide proper care for a 5-year-old child. Cassandra had been prepared to rule in favor of the mother and stepfather, limiting Daniel's access to supervised visits and weekend arrangements that would allow him to maintain a relationship with his daughter while ensuring the child's primary residence remained in the more stable environment. But the man who'd saved her life didn't match the picture painted by those legal documents. The Daniel Hayes who'd fought the Pacific Ocean to reach her, who'd performed CPR with steady hands and unwavering determination, who'd carried her to safety without a moment's hesitation, that man possessed qualities that couldn't be quantified in financial statements or psychological evaluations. Mrs. Lee? A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. A young nurse with kind eyes was standing in the doorway holding a clipboard. "There's a gentleman here asking about you. Says he's a reporter from Channel 8 News. Something about doing a story on your rescue." Cassandra's stomach clenched. The last thing she needed was media attention connecting her to Daniel Hayes, especially with the custody hearing scheduled for Thursday. The appearance of bias or impropriety could destroy both their lives in different ways. "Tell him I'm not available for comment, and that any requests need to go through the court's public information office," she said firmly. "And please make sure hospital security understands that I don't want any media contact while I'm here." The nurse nodded and disappeared, but Cassandra's anxiety only intensified. If reporters were already sniffing around the story, it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots between the heroic lifeguard and the judge he'd saved. The ethical implications were staggering. She should recuse herself from the case, immediately pass it to another judge, and maintain the professional distance that the judicial system required. but something held her back from making that call. Instead, she found herself thinking about the moment when consciousness had returned on the beach, when she'd opened her eyes to find Daniel Hayes leaning over her seawater dripping from his hair, his face etched with concern for a complete stranger. There had been something in his eyes, a depth of compassion and strength that spoke to character in ways that no legal document could capture. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Linda. "Saw the news about your accident. Are you okay? Do you need me to come down from San Francisco?" Cassandra hadn't even realized the story had made the news beyond local coverage. She quickly typed back, "I'm fine, being discharged this afternoon. Just a close call, but I'm okay." "What were you doing in the ocean anyway?" "You hate swimming." That was the question Cassandra had been dreading. The one she'd have to answer eventually for the hospital staff, for her colleagues at the courthouse, for herself. The truth was too complicated, too tangled up in emotions she'd been trying to suppress for months. She'd gone to Pacific Beach at dawn because she couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about the Hayes custody case and the dozen others like it that had crossed her bench in the past year. Single fathers fighting desperate battles to maintain relationships with their children. Mothers struggling to rebuild their lives after divorce while ensuring their kids had stability. Complex family dynamics that couldn't be reduced to simple legal formulas, no matter how hard the system tried. The walk on the beach was supposed to clear her head, help her organize her thoughts before the week's hearings began. But as she'd stood at the water's edge watching the storm-driven waves crash against the shore, something had broken inside her. The weight of making decisions that would shape children's lives forever. The isolation of a job that required her to remain emotionally detached from the human consequences of her rulings. The growing certainty that she'd lost touch with the compassion that had driven her to family law in the first place. She'd waded into the surf without really intending to swim, drawn by some inexplicable need to feel something other than the numbness that had settled over her life like a gray shroud. The waves had been stronger than she'd anticipated, the current more treacherous, and by the time she'd realized her mistake, the ocean had already claimed her. "Linda. I need to ask you something," she texted back. "Do you remember why I wanted to become a family court judge?" The response came quickly, "Because you said every child deserved someone fighting for their best interests. You wanted to be the voice for kids who couldn't speak for themselves in court." Cassandra stared at the message for a long time. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of that mission. The endless parade of bitter custody disputes, the pressure to clear cases efficiently, the cynicism that came from seeing families tear themselves apart in courtrooms, it had all calcified around her heart like armor. She'd become known as Judge Ice not because she didn't care, but because caring too much had nearly destroyed her early in her career. She remembered the first custody case that had really haunted her 5 years ago. A father fighting for visitation rights after his ex-wife had relocated across the country with their son. The man had been articulate, employed, clearly devoted to his child, but the logistics of long-distance custody were complicated and expensive. She'd ruled in favor of maintaining the status quo, allowing the mother to keep the child in their new state with limited visitation for the father. 6 months later, she'd learned that the father had committed suicide, leaving behind a note that spoke of his devastation at losing his son. The case had been legally sound, based on established precedent, and the child's need for stability. But the human cost had been devastating, and Cassandra had promised herself she'd never again underestimate the profound bonds between parents and children. The promise had led to years of increasingly rigid adherence to established guidelines, safer rulings that might not account for individual circumstances, but would protect her from making decisions that could destroy lives. Judge Ice had been born from a desire to avoid the very kind of tragedy that her emotional detachment had failed to prevent. Dr. Martinez returned with her discharge papers, interrupting her troubled thoughts. "Your recovery has been remarkable, Mrs. Lee. No lasting effects from the hypothermia lungs are clear, and your neurological function is completely normal. You're free to go home, but I want you to take it easy for the next few days. No strenuous activity, plenty of rest, and follow up with your primary care physician next week." "Thank you, doctor. And thank you for taking such good care of me." "Thank the man who pulled you out of the water," Dr. Martinez said with a smile. "Another 5 minutes, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Daniel Hayes is a hell of a lifeguard. This is the 3rd rescue of his that's come through our emergency department this year, and every victim has made a full recovery. 3 rescues this year alone." Cassandra filed that information away as she signed the discharge papers and gathered her belongings. The Daniel Hayes who'd saved her wasn't just a man who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time. He was someone who made a career of putting himself at risk to save others. As she waited for her Uber to arrive, Cassandra found herself scrolling through more information about Daniel's background. His military service record showed 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Purple Heart, and an honorable discharge following an IED explosion that had left him with chronic back pain and mild traumatic brain injury. The PTSD diagnosis in his medical records wasn't a sign of weakness or instability. It was a badge of honor earned in service to his country. His employment history told a story of adaptation rather than failure. After his military discharge, he'd worked construction until his back injury made physical labor impossible, then had retrained as a lifeguard and EMT. He worked multiple jobs not because he couldn't hold steady employment, but because lifeguarding was seasonal work that didn't provide year-round income sufficient to support a family. The picture emerging from her research was radically different from the preliminary impression she'd formed from the legal documents. This wasn't a deadbeat father trying to avoid responsibility. This was a man who'd structured his entire life around being present for his daughter, choosing flexible employment that would allow him to attend school events and soccer games, even if it meant financial sacrifice. Her phone buzzed with another text, this one from Daniel Hayes himself. "Just wanted to check that you're feeling okay. Hope the hospital is taking good care of you." Cassandra stared at the message, her finger hovering over the keyboard. She should maintain professional distance, avoid any contact that could compromise her position if she remained on the case. But the man had saved her life, and basic human decency demanded some acknowledgement of that fact. "Much better, thank you. Being discharged this afternoon. I can never thank you enough for what you did. Just glad you're okay. Take care of yourself." The simple exchange felt weighted with unspoken complexity. Neither of them had acknowledged the elephant in the room, the custody hearing that was now just 3 days away. But Cassandra could feel the tension underlying their polite words, the awareness that their professional relationship would soon transform this personal connection into an ethical minefield. Her Uber arrived, and as they drove through the familiar streets of San Diego toward her condo in Mission Hills, Cassandra found herself looking at the city with different eyes. Every corner seemed to hold new significance: the playground where Daniel's daughter might play, the elementary school where she might attend classes, the modest neighborhoods where working families built lives that might not look impressive on paper, but were rich with love and dedication. Her condo felt sterile and empty after the warmth of human connection she'd experienced at the hospital. The modern furniture and expensive artwork suddenly seemed like barriers against the messiness of real life, rather than symbols of her professional success. She'd built a beautiful, controlled environment that perfectly reflected her image as Judge Ice, and she realized with startling clarity that she was profoundly lonely. Cassandra spent the afternoon reviewing the Hayes case file with new eyes, seeing details she'd previously overlooked. Daniel's apartment was modest but meticulously maintained, with a bedroom he'd converted specifically for his daughter's visits. His financial statements showed careful budgeting and consistent payments of child support, even during periods when his own income was irregular. Character references from fellow lifeguards, neighbors, and his daughter's teachers painted a picture of a devoted father who prioritized his child's well-being above his own comfort. The psychological evaluation that had initially concerned her now read differently in context. Yes, Daniel Hayes showed signs of PTSD and depression related to his military service and the stress of the custody battle. But the psychologist had also noted his strong coping mechanisms, his commitment to therapy, and his ability to separate his personal struggles from his parenting responsibilities. The recommendation had been for continued counseling, not for restricted access to his child. Most telling was the section of the report dealing with his daughter's attachment to him. Lila Hayes clearly adored her father, lighting up whenever she spoke about their time together. She felt safe with him, trusted him completely, and showed no signs of distress or behavioral problems related to their relationship. If anything, she seemed most anxious when discussing the possibility that her visits with her father might be reduced. As evening approached, Cassandra found herself driving back toward Pacific Beach, drawn by an impulse she couldn't quite explain. She parked near the lifeguard station where Daniel worked and walked down to the water's edge, standing at the spot where he'd pulled her from the ocean just 24 hours earlier. The waves were calmer now, gently lapping at the shore under a sky painted with brilliant oranges and purples by the setting sun. A few families were scattered along the beach, children building sandcastles while their parents watched from folding chairs. It was a scene of simple contentment, the kind of everyday happiness that seemed to elude her own carefully structured life. Judge Lee. She turned to find Daniel Hayes approaching from the direction of the lifeguard station, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a small soccer ball. Even out of uniform, he carried himself with the quiet confidence she remembered from the rescue, but there was wariness in his eyes now, an awareness of the complicated situation they found themselves in. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to see the place where you saved my life. How are you feeling? You should probably be resting, not walking on the beach." "I'm fine. Actually, I feel better than I have in months." The admission surprised her with its honesty. "I wanted to thank you again, but I also wanted to apologize. This situation, it's complicated." Daniel glanced around, making sure they were far enough from other beachgoers to speak privately. "I know who you are, Judge Lee. I know about the hearing on Thursday. Then you understand why I shouldn't be here, why we shouldn't be talking." "Maybe, but you came anyway." Cassandra studied his face, seeing the same depth of character that had struck her during the rescue. "I've been reviewing your case file. Really reviewing it, not just skimming through to confirm my initial assumptions. And I realized I almost made a terrible mistake. I was so focused on following guidelines and precedents that I nearly lost sight of what this case is actually about. A little girl who loves her father, and a man who's built his entire life around being the best parent he can be." Daniel's expression softened, hope flickering in his eyes before caution reasserted itself. "With respect, Your Honor, what happened yesterday doesn't change the facts of my situation. I'm still a single father working multiple jobs to make ends meet. I still live in a 2-bedroom apartment instead of a 5-bedroom house. I still have PTSD and a service-connected disability. Those aren't character flaws, Mr. Hayes. They're challenges you've overcome while maintaining your commitment to your daughter. Tell that to the family court system." Cassandra winced at the bitterness in his voice, recognizing her own contribution to the cynicism that many parents developed toward the judicial process. "You're right to be angry. The system isn't perfect, and judges like me sometimes lose sight of the human beings behind the case numbers." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the waves roll in as the sky continued to darken. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "Can I ask you something? Off the record?" "I'm not sure anything between us can be off the record at this point." "What made you become a family court judge? I mean, it can't be an easy job making decisions about people's children." The question hit closer to home than Daniel could have known. "I wanted to be a voice for children who couldn't speak for themselves in court. I believed I could make a difference, help families navigate their worst moments, and find solutions that would protect kids while preserving important relationships." "What changed?" "I did. I got tired of watching families destroy themselves in my courtroom. I started focusing more on efficiency and precedent than on understanding the people behind the cases. I built walls to protect myself from the emotional weight of the decisions I was making." And now, Cassandra turned to face him fully. "Now I remember why I became a judge in the first place. You saved my life yesterday, Mr. Hayes, but I think you may have saved more than that. You reminded me that every case that comes before my bench represents real people with real pain and real love. You reminded me what courage looks like." Daniel shifted the soccer ball to his other hand. "I'm picking up Lila from soccer practice in 20 minutes. She doesn't know about the hearing on Thursday. She just knows that there's a chance she might not be able to stay with me as much anymore, and she doesn't understand why." "What does she understand?" "That her daddy loves her more than anything in the world. That I would do anything to protect her and keep her safe. That no matter what happens in any courtroom, that will never change." The simple, profound truth of his words settled over Cassandra like a revelation. This was what she'd been missing in all her careful analysis of financial statements and psychological evaluations, the immeasurable power of unconditional love and the lengths a true parent would go to preserve their child's well-being. "I have to recuse myself from your case," she said quietly. "What happened yesterday creates a conflict of interest that I can't ignore." Daniel nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his face. "I understand. Who will take over?" "Most likely Judge Kane. He's been on the family court bench for 15 years, very experienced." "What's he like?" Cassandra hesitated. Robert Kane was old school, a traditionalist who believed strongly in the nuclear family model and tended to favor two-parent households in custody disputes. He was also fair and thorough, unlikely to be swayed by emotion or circumstance. If Daniel's case was going to be decided purely on its legal merits, Kane would give him a fair hearing. But Kane wouldn't see the man who'd risked his life to save a stranger, wouldn't understand the depth of character that couldn't be captured in legal documents. "He's a good judge," she said finally. "Fair, experienced, thorough. But he's not someone who looks beyond the paperwork. He believes in precedent and established guidelines. Which means Lila goes to live with Sarah and Marcus full-time." Cassandra couldn't bring herself to confirm what they both knew to be true. Robert Kane would look at the surface facts, stable two-parent household versus struggling single father, and follow decades of family court precedent. Daniel would be lucky to retain weekend visitation rights. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry this happened the way it did, and I'm sorry I can't be the judge you need for this case. You're not responsible for any of this. You didn't ask to be rescued, and I didn't know who you were when I pulled you out of the water. We're both just trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation." As if summoned by their conversation, a young girl's voice called out across the beach. "Daddy, Daddy, look what I can do." Cassandra turned to see a little girl with Daniel's dark hair and serious eyes running toward them across the sand, skillfully dribbling the soccer ball between her feet. She was wearing a purple and white soccer uniform and had the kind of radiant smile that could light up a room. "That's amazing, Princess," Daniel called back, his entire demeanor transforming as his daughter approached. The wariness and tension melted away, replaced by pure, uncomplicated joy. Lila executed a perfect kick that sent the ball flying toward the water, then noticed Cassandra standing beside her father. "Hi," she said with the friendly curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Are you my daddy's friend?" Cassandra felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Yes, I suppose I am. Are you the lady from the hospital Daddy said he helped someone who got hurt in the water?" "That's right. Your daddy saved my life." Lila nodded solemnly, as if this was perfectly normal information. "My daddy saves lots of people. He's a real-life superhero." The simple statement hit Cassandra with stunning force. Here was a little girl who saw her father exactly as he was, not as a struggling single parent with financial limitations, but as a hero who put himself at risk to help others. In Lila's eyes, Daniel Hayes wasn't lacking anything. He was perfect exactly as he was. "She's right," Cassandra said, looking at Daniel. "You are a hero." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. "Come on, Lila. We should get home. You have school tomorrow." "Can I show you my room?" Lila asked Cassandra suddenly. "Daddy painted it purple because that's my favorite color, and he put up shelves for all my books." "Lila," Daniel started, but Cassandra was already nodding. "I would love to see your room." The short walk to Daniel's apartment complex revealed a neighborhood that was clean and safe, if not affluent. Children played in the small courtyard, while their parents chatted on benches, creating the kind of community atmosphere that couldn't be purchased, regardless of income level. Daniel's apartment was exactly what Cassandra had expected from reading his file, but seeing it in person gave her a completely different perspective. It was small but immaculately clean, with furniture that was functional rather than fashionable. Every surface showed evidence of careful attention to detail: fresh flowers. In a mason jar on the kitchen table, hand-drawn pictures covering the refrigerator books, organized neatly on homemade shelves. But it was Lila's room that completely transformed Cassandra's understanding of what constituted a suitable home for a child. The walls were indeed painted purple with glow-in-the-dark stars, carefully arranged on the ceiling in actual constellation patterns. The furniture was mismatched, but lovingly maintained, and every inch of space was utilized efficiently to create areas for sleeping, studying, and playing. "See?" Lila said proudly, pointing to a bookshelf that was clearly handmade. "Daddy built that for me so I could have all my books in one place. And he reads me 2 stories every night, sometimes 3 if I've been really good." "Lila knows all her letters already," Daniel said quietly. "She's reading at a 2nd grade level." Cassandra examined the bookshelf more closely, noting the careful craftsmanship, despite Daniel's obvious lack of expensive tools. The books ranged from picture books to early chapter books, many of them showing the wear that came from repeated readings. On the small desk beneath the window, she could see evidence of homework help worksheets, with careful corrections in Daniel's handwriting, encouraging notes, gold star stickers for good work. "And this is where Daddy helps me with my math." Lila continued, climbing onto the desk chair. "He's really good at math. He can do big numbers in his head." "Your daddy sounds very smart." "He is, and he makes the best pancakes, and he knows all the words to my favorite songs, and he taught me how to swim without floaties." Each innocent revelation felt like a dagger in Cassandra's heart. This child was clearly thriving in her father's care, developing intellectually and emotionally in ways that no amount of material wealth could guarantee. The love between father and daughter was so tangible, it filled the small apartment like warmth from a fireplace. "Judge Lee," Daniel said quietly, while Lila was distracted by organizing her toy box. I know you can't change what's going to happen on Thursday, but I want you to know that whatever the court decides, Lila will always know she's loved. I'll make sure she understands that none of this is her fault." The selflessness of his statement, his concern for his daughter's emotional well-being, even in the face of losing her, finally broke through the last of Cassandra's professional reserve. This wasn't about legal precedent or court guidelines. This was about a father whose entire world revolved around his child's happiness, and a little girl who clearly adored the man who'd built her a purple room with constellation ceilings and handmade bookshelves. "Actually," Cassandra said slowly, an idea beginning to form in her mind, "there might be another option." Daniel looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "I need to make some phone calls. There are procedures, protocols that might allow. I can't promise anything, but I may not have to recuse myself from your case after all." "I don't understand." Cassandra looked around the apartment again, seeing it now through the eyes of someone who understood what really mattered in a child's life. "Let me worry about the legal technicalities. You just focus on being the father you already are." As she prepared to leave, Lila threw her arms around Cassandra's waist in an impulsive hug. "Thank you for being my daddy's friend," she whispered. Cassandra hugged her back, feeling tears she'd been holding back all day finally begin to fall. "Thank you for showing me your room, sweetheart. You're a very lucky little girl to have such a wonderful daddy." "I know," Lila said simply, and in those two words Cassandra heard everything she needed to know about the Hayes family. Walking back to her car, Cassandra's mind was already racing through the possibilities. There were precedents for judges remaining on cases despite personal connections, particularly when the connection had occurred after the case was filed and didn't involve bias or prejudice. If she could demonstrate that the rescue hadn't compromised her ability to rule fairly, and if she could present compelling evidence that the best interests of the child would be served by maintaining her position on the case, she might be able to stay. It would be risky, unconventional, and would certainly raise eyebrows among her colleagues. But as she drove through the night toward her empty condo, Cassandra Lee knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't let Robert Kane decide the fate of the Hayes family. Not when she'd seen firsthand what kind of man Daniel Hayes really was, and not when a little girl's future happiness hung in the balance. The rescue had changed everything, and now it was time to find out whether justice and mercy could coexist in the sterile halls of family court. The courthouse steps had never felt more daunting, as Daniel Hayes climbed them at 7:30 Wednesday morning, 24 hours before the hearing that would determine his daughter's future. In his hand he carried a manila envelope containing documents that his lawyer Elena Vasquez had requested character references, employment records, and medical clearances that might help their case. But Daniel knew that all the paperwork in the world couldn't change the fundamental mathematics of family court, one struggling single father versus one stable two-parent household. He'd barely slept since his encounter with Judge Lee at Pacific Beach. The conversation had replayed in his mind throughout the night, her words offering a glimmer of hope that felt almost too dangerous to embrace. There might be another option, she'd said. But what option? How could a judge who should recuse herself from his case possibly remain involved without destroying both their reputations? "Danny." Elena's voice cut through his brooding thoughts as she approached from the parking garage, her arms full of legal files and her expression grim. At 55, Elena Vasquez had been practicing family law longer than Daniel had been alive, and she'd seen enough custody battles to recognize when the deck was stacked against her client. "Morning, Elena. Any word on whether Judge Lee is still on our case?" Elena's expression darkened further. "That's what we need to talk about. Walk with me." They found a quiet corner in the courthouse lobby away from the stream of lawyers, litigants, and court personnel beginning their day. Elena set down her files and looked at Daniel with the kind of serious expression that usually preceded bad news. "I got a call from Judge Lee's clerk last night. The hearing is still scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m., and she's still presiding." Daniel felt his heart skip. That's good news, right? "I honestly don't know, Danny. In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this. A judge who should clearly recuse herself due to a personal connection chooses to stay on the case instead. Either she's planning to bend over backwards to avoid any appearance of favoritism, which would hurt us, or something else is going on that I don't understand." "What kind of something else?" Elena studied his face carefully. "Why don't you tell me exactly what happened when you two talked yesterday, and don't leave anything out, because if there's something I should know about this situation, I need to know it now." Daniel recounted the conversation on the beach, Lila's impromptu room tour, and Judge Lee's cryptic comment about another option. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "Jesus, Danny. You took a sitting judge to your apartment. You introduced her to Lila. She asked to see Lila's room. What was I supposed to do? Say no?" "Yes, that's exactly what you should have done." Elena ran her hands through her hair in frustration. "This could blow up in our faces in spectacular fashion. If Sarah's lawyer gets wind of any of this, he won't hear it from me. That's not the point. Judges talk to each other, clerks gossip, and courthouse walls have ears. If this gets out, it'll look like you're trying to manipulate the system by leveraging your rescue of Judge Lee." Daniel felt his stomach drop. He'd been so focused on the hope in Judge Lee's words that he hadn't considered how their interaction might be perceived by others. "So, what do? We proceed very carefully, and we hope that whatever Judge Lee has in mind doesn't destroy your chances of maintaining any relationship with your daughter." They were interrupted by the approach of a familiar figure, Marcus Thornton, Sarah's new husband, walking with the confident stride of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. At 48, Marcus was everything Daniel wasn't: expensively dressed, financially secure, and radiating the kind of calm assurance that came from never having to worry about making rent or choosing between groceries and gas money. "Daniel," Marcus said, with a nod that was polite but cool. "Elena." "Marcus." Daniel kept his voice neutral, though seeing his daughter's stepfather always triggered a complex mix of emotions. Marcus wasn't a bad man. In fact, he'd been nothing but kind to Lila, which made everything more complicated. It would have been easier to hate him if he'd been cruel or indifferent to his stepdaughter. "I was hoping we might have a word," Marcus continued. "Privately." Elena immediately stepped closer to Daniel. "Anything you need to say to my client can be said in my presence. This isn't about the legal proceedings. It's about Lila." Despite Elena's warning look, Daniel found himself nodding. 5 minutes. They walked to the other side of the lobby while Elena watched from a distance, clearly unhappy about the impromptu conference. Marcus chose his words carefully, his voice low enough to avoid being overheard. "I want you to know that none of this was my idea. Sarah initiated these proceedings long before I was in the picture. But you're supporting them now. I'm supporting my wife, yes, but I'm also thinking about what's best for Lila." Daniel felt his temper flare. "And you think what's best for her is to take her away from her father. I think what's best for her is stability, consistency, a home where she doesn't have to worry about whether there's enough money for school supplies or whether she'll have to move if her father can't make rent." The words stung because they carried more than a grain of truth. Daniel had worried about those same things countless times, lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating his budget trying to stretch every dollar to ensure Lila never felt the impact of his financial struggles. Money isn't everything, Marcus. No, it's not. But security matters. Educational opportunities matter. Having two parents who can both attend her school events without worrying about missing work matters. I've never missed anything important to Lila. I know, and I respect that. But how long can you keep it up? How long before the stress breaks you down? How long before Lila starts noticing that her life with you is harder than her life with us? Marcus's words hit their target with surgical precision, voicing fears that Daniel had been struggling to suppress. He'd seen the way Lila's eyes lit up when she talked about the playroom at Sarah and Marcus's house, the swimming pool in their backyard, the family vacations they could afford to take. How long before those comparisons turned into resentment? There's something else, Marcus continued. Sarah's been doing research on Judge Lee. Did you know she's called Judge Ice in family court circles? Apparently, she almost never deviates from established precedent in custody cases. Traditional two-parent households win 93% of the time in her courtroom. Daniel felt the last of his hope begin to crumble. If Marcus was right, and why would he lie about something so easily verified, then Judge Lee's reputation suggested that yesterday's conversation had been meaningless. Professional obligation would override any personal feelings about the rescue. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that we're not trying to destroy you, Daniel. We're trying to do what's best for Lila. And maybe it's time to consider a compromise that everyone can live with. What kind of compromise? Joint custody with primary residence at our house. Lila spends weekends with you, alternating holidays, summer visits. You remain her father, but she gets the stability and resources that Sarah and I can provide. It was, Daniel realized, probably the best offer he was going to get. It was certainly better than the supervised visitation that Judge Kane would likely award. But the thought of seeing his daughter only on weekends, of becoming a part-time parent in her life, felt like accepting a kind of death. I need to think about it. Of course, but Daniel, tomorrow's hearing is going to happen whether we reach an agreement or not. And if it goes to a verdict, you might end up with much less than what I'm offering now. After Marcus walked away, Daniel rejoined Elena, who immediately read the devastation in his expression. What did he say? He offered joint custody with primary residence at their house. Weekends and holidays for me. Elena was quiet for a long moment. That's actually a pretty generous offer, considering the circumstances. You think I should take it? I think you should consider it carefully. If Judge Lee rules against us tomorrow, and statistically, that's the most likely outcome, you could end up with supervised visits only. At least with Marcus's offer, you'd still be a real presence in Lila's life. They spent the next hour reviewing their strategy for the following day's hearing, but Daniel's heart wasn't in it. The conversation with Marcus had crystallized his growing certainty that he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. The system was designed to favor stability over love, resources over devotion, and by those measures, Sarah and Marcus were clearly the better choice for Lila's primary custodians. By noon, Daniel found himself back at Pacific Beach, staring out at the waters where he'd pulled Judge Lee from certain death just 3 days earlier. The rescue felt like it had happened in another lifetime, before hope had transformed into resignation, before he'd been forced to confront the possibility that being a good father might not be enough to keep his daughter. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Danny, we need to talk before tomorrow. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Garnet at 2? Daniel stared at the message, noting the use of his old nickname. Sarah only called him Danny when she wanted something, or when she was feeling guilty about something. Since the divorce, their communications had been strictly formal, mediated through lawyers, and focused solely on logistics involving Lila. Fine. 2 p.m. The coffee shop was one they'd frequented during their marriage back when they'd been young and idealistic, and certain that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. Sarah was already waiting at a corner table when Daniel arrived, looking nervous and avoiding eye contact. At 32, Sarah was still beautiful in the polished way that her new life allowed professional highlights in her hair, expensive clothes, manicured nails that spoke of leisure time and disposable income. But Daniel could see stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage, and her smile seemed forced. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want, Sarah?" "I want to explain why I'm doing this. I want you to understand that it's not about punishing you or taking Lila away out of spite." "Then what is it about?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, stirring her latte with mechanical precision. "Do you remember when Lila was 3 and got that ear infection? She was crying all night, running a fever, and we couldn't afford to take her to urgent care because it was the week before payday and we'd already maxed out the credit card." Daniel remembered. It had been one of the worst nights of his early fatherhood, holding his sick daughter while feeling helpless to get her the medical attention she needed immediately. "We took her to the emergency room the next morning. They gave her antibiotics and she was fine. But she didn't have to wait until morning, Danny. If we'd had insurance that covered urgent care, if we'd had savings for emergencies, if we'd had the kind of financial stability that meant we didn't have to choose between rent money and medical bills, she could have gotten treatment 8 hours earlier. She turned out fine. This time. But what about next time? What about when she needs orthodontics or wants to take piano lessons or has the chance to go on a school trip that costs money we don't have?" Daniel felt his defenses rising. "I've never let Lila go without anything she truly needed. I know. You've sacrificed everything for her, and I respect that. But sacrificing everything shouldn't be necessary, Danny. Children deserve parents who can provide for them without having to choose between their own well-being and their child's needs. So this is about money. It's about security. It's about giving Lila opportunities and experiences that you can't afford on a lifeguard's salary. It's about making sure she never has to worry about whether her father is okay, whether he's eating enough, whether he's working himself to death trying to provide for her." The accusation hit home because it was true. Daniel had lost weight over the past year, skipping meals to make sure there was enough food for Lila during her visits. He'd worked extra shifts to afford the soccer cleats she'd needed, the birthday party she'd wanted, the small luxuries that other children took for granted. "I'm a good father, Sarah." "You're an amazing father. But being a good father isn't just about love, Danny. It's about being able to provide stability and opportunities and a future where your child doesn't have to worry about adult problems." Lila doesn't worry about adult problems. Doesn't she? She told me last week that she wants to get a job when she grows up so she can help you pay for things. She's 5 years old, Danny. She shouldn't know that money is something to worry about. Daniel felt the words like a physical blow. He'd worked so hard to shield Lila from his financial struggles to make their time together feel carefree and joyful. The thought that she'd absorbed his stress despite his best efforts was devastating. "Marcus and I can give her things you can't," Sarah continued. "Private school, college savings, family vacations, a house with a yard where she can have a dog. But more than that, we can give her a life where she doesn't have to worry about taking care of her parent. I don't need taking care of. Don't you? When was the last time you went to a doctor? When was the last time you bought yourself new clothes or went out with friends or did something just for you? You've turned yourself into a martyr for Lila's sake, and that's not healthy for either of you. Sarah reached across the table and touched his hand, the first physical contact they'd had in months. I'm not trying to take her away from you, Danny. I'm trying to give her the best possible life. And maybe I'm trying to give you permission to have a life too. My life is fine. Your life is exhausting. You work 16-hour days, you live in constant financial stress, and you're so focused on being Lila's provider that you've forgotten how to be anything else. When was the last time you went on a date? When was the last time you laughed about something that didn't involve our daughter? Daniel pulled his hand away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the conversation and the accuracy of Sarah's observations. What do you want from me? I want you to consider Marcus's offer. Joint custody weekends and holidays, summer visits. You'd still be Lila's father, but you wouldn't have to carry the entire weight of providing for her alone. And you'd have what you want: primary custody and a clear conscience. I'd have what's best for Lila, and what might actually be best for you too if you'd let yourself admit it. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 5 years of marriage and 2 years of divorce hanging between them like a bridge neither could quite cross. Finally, Sarah gathered her purse and stood to leave. Think about it, Danny. Really think about it. Tomorrow's hearing doesn't have to be a war. It could be the beginning of a better arrangement for everyone. After she left, Daniel remained at the coffee shop for another hour, nursing cold coffee and trying to process everything that had been said. Sarah wasn't wrong about his circumstances. He was exhausted financially, stressed, and completely consumed by his role as Lila's provider. But the alternative she was offering felt like giving up, like admitting that love wasn't enough and that he'd failed as a father. His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. The caller ID showed Judge Lee's office number. Mr. Hayes, this is Jennifer, Judge Lee's clerk. The judge would like to see you in her chambers at 4 o'clock today if you're available. Daniel's pulse quickened. Is my lawyer supposed to be there? The judge requested to see you alone. She said it was regarding procedural matters related to tomorrow's hearing. Daniel agreed to the meeting and spent the next 2 hours trying to imagine what Judge Lee might want to discuss privately. Whatever it was, it had to be significant enough to justify the ethical risk of meeting with a litigant outside the presence of counsel. Judge Lee's chambers were exactly what Daniel had expected. Walls lined with law books, diplomas, and awards, carefully arranged furniture that spoke of authority and permanence. But the woman sitting behind the imposing desk looked different than she had in her hospital bed or on the beach. She was wearing a conservative gray suit and had her hair pulled back in a severe bun, projecting the image of judicial authority that made her known as Judge Ice. Thank you for coming, Mr. Hayes. Please sit down. Daniel took the chair across from her desk, acutely aware that this conversation could determine his daughter's future. I want to begin by acknowledging that this situation is highly unusual. By all rights, I should have recused myself from your case the moment I realized who you were. The fact that I chose not to do so requires explanation. I'm listening. Judge Lee leaned back in her chair, and for a moment Daniel caught a glimpse of the vulnerable woman he'd pulled from the ocean. I've been a family court judge for 8 years, Mr. Hayes. In that time, I've presided over hundreds of custody cases, and I've developed something of a reputation for strict adherence to established precedent and guidelines. Judge Ice. You've heard the nickname. It's not inaccurate. I earned it by prioritizing legal consistency over individual circumstances, by focusing on statistical outcomes rather than the complex human realities behind each case. Daniel waited for her to continue, sensing that she was building towards something important. 3 days ago, you saved my life without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. You risked your own safety for a complete stranger, And when I thanked you, you said it was just what you were there for. That level of selflessness, that instinctive willingness to put another person's well-being above your own, those are exactly the qualities that make someone a good parent. With respect, Your Honor, that doesn't change the facts of my case. No, it doesn't. You're still a single father with limited financial resources, working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Your ex-wife and her new husband can still provide advantages that you can't match. On paper, this case should be decided exactly as my precedent suggests. Judge Lee stood and walked to the window overlooking the courthouse parking lot. But I made a mistake, Mr. Hayes. A terrible mistake that I've been trying to correct for 5 years. She told him about the father who'd committed suicide after losing custody of his son, about the legal ruling that had been technically correct but humanly devastating. Daniel listened in silence, beginning to understand the pain behind Judge Lee's professional reputation. I promised myself I'd never again underestimate the bonds between parents and children. But somewhere along the way, I started protecting myself from making emotional decisions by making no emotional decisions at all. I turned the law into a shield against the messy, complicated reality of human relationships. And now I remember what family law is supposed to be, about protecting children while preserving the relationships that matter most to them. Your daughter loves you, Mr. Hayes, not because you can provide her with material advantages, but because you've built your entire life around being the father she needs. Judge Lee returned to her desk and pulled out a thick file, Daniel's case. I've spent the last 2 days reviewing every piece of evidence, every document, every evaluation, and I've reached some conclusions that I want to share with you before tomorrow's hearing. Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Your ex-wife's petition for sole custody is based primarily on your financial limitations and the advantages she can provide through her new marriage. But financial resources, while important, are not the only factor that determines a child's best interests. She opened the file and began reading from documents Daniel had never seen before. Lila's teacher reports that she consistently talks about her father with pride and affection. She describes him as her hero and becomes visibly excited when discussing their time together. Her academic performance is excellent. Her social development is appropriate for her age, and she shows no signs of distress or behavioral problems related to her living arrangements. Judge Lee continued reading from evaluation reports, character references, and psychological assessments that painted a picture of a thriving child with a strong attachment to her father. Your employment history shows adaptability and dedication rather than instability. You've structured your work life around being available for your daughter, choosing flexibility over income security. Your military service record demonstrates character sacrifice and the ability to perform under pressure. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow I'm going to rule in favor of maintaining the current custody arrangement. Joint custody with equal time split between both parents, with decisions about education and medical care made jointly. Daniel felt the words hit him like a physical force. I don't understand. Everyone told me that with your track record, my track record reflects a judge who lost sight of what family law is supposed to accomplish. Tomorrow I intend to correct that record. But the ethical issues, the appearance of bias because of the rescue. Judge Lee smiled for the first time since he'd entered her chambers. I've consulted with the Judicial Ethics Board. While the situation is unusual, there's no violation of ethical standards, as long as I can demonstrate that my decision is based on legal merit rather than personal gratitude. And Mr. Hayes, your case has overwhelming legal merit that has nothing to do with what happened 3 days ago. Daniel felt tears he'd been holding back for months finally begin to fall. Thank you. Thank you for seeing who I really am instead of just what's in that file. Thank you for reminding me who I'm supposed to be as a judge. Your rescue saved more than my life, Mr. Hayes. It saved my ability to remember that justice without compassion isn't justice at all. As Daniel left the courthouse that afternoon, his phone was already ringing with a call from Elena, who'd somehow heard about the private meeting within hours. Danny, what the hell happened in there? The courthouse grapevine is saying that Judge Lee is planning something unprecedented for tomorrow. She's going to rule in our favor, Elena. She's going to let me keep joint custody. Are you sure? Because if you misunderstood something, if you're building up false hope, I'm sure. She laid out the whole decision, explained her reasoning. Lila gets to stay with both her parents. Elena was quiet for a long moment. I've been practicing family law for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Judge Lee doesn't reverse her own precedents. She doesn't make emotional decisions. She doesn't meet privately with litigants to preview her rulings. Well, she just did all three. Danny, I need you to understand something. If this gets out, if Sarah's lawyer challenges the decision based on your private meeting with Judge Lee, this could all fall apart. Appellate courts don't look kindly on judges who appear to be showing favoritism. But Daniel was barely listening. For the first time in months, he could imagine a future where he'd continue to be a real father to Lila, where he wouldn't have to say goodbye to her on Sunday evenings and wonder if she'd still remember him as more than a weekend visitor. He called Lila immediately, needing to hear her voice. Daddy, guess what? I scored 2 goals at practice today. That's amazing, Princess. I'm so proud of you. Are you coming to my game this weekend? It's the championship and Coach says we have a really good chance of winning. I'll be there with bells on and my really loud whistle. Daddy, you sound happy. Are you happy? The simple question from his 5-year-old daughter summed up everything that mattered. Yeah, Princess, I'm happy. Everything's going to be okay. I love you, Daddy, more than all the fish in the sea, more than all the waves on the beach, more than all the stars in the sky. As Daniel drove home through the San Diego evening, he thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A storm, a desperate woman in the surf, a split-second decision to dive into dangerous waters, and now a future where he'd continue to be the father his daughter needed. Judge Cassandra Lee had been wrong about one thing, though. The rescue hadn't just reminded her about justice and compassion. It had taught both of them that sometimes the most important decisions couldn't be found in law books or precedent cases. Sometimes justice required the courage to see beyond the surface facts to the deeper truths that connected people's lives in ways that no legal system could fully capture. Tomorrow's hearing would make it official, but Daniel already knew that he'd won the most important battle of his life. Not because he'd saved a judge from drowning, but because that judge had chosen to save him in return, not from the ocean, but from a system that had almost failed to recognize the most fundamental truth of all. That love, dedication, and sacrifice couldn't be measured in dollars or square footage, and that being a good parent had nothing to do with having a 5-bedroom house and everything to do with having a heart big enough to build your entire world around your child's happiness. The hearing was tomorrow, but the real decision had already been made in the heart of a woman who'd remembered what it meant to choose justice over procedure, compassion over precedent, and human truth over legal convenience. The morning of the hearing dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that Southern California delivered after storms, as if the universe itself was offering a fresh start. Daniel Hayes stood at his apartment window watching the sunrise paint the Pacific in shades of gold and pink. But the beauty of the morning couldn't calm the nervous energy coursing through his veins. In 3 hours, he would walk into Judge Cassandra Lee's courtroom and learn whether their private conversation had been a promise or merely the wishful thinking of a desperate father. He'd been awake since 4 a.m., unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that had accumulated over months of legal stress. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he'd replayed Judge Lee's words from yesterday afternoon, searching for any hint that he might have misunderstood her intentions. She'd seemed so certain, so definitive in her preview of the ruling. But Elena's warnings echoed in his mind. Family court was unpredictable, and judges sometimes changed their minds between chambers conversations and official proceedings. "Daddy." Lila's sleepy voice came from the hallway. She stood in her purple pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, clutching the stuffed dolphin he'd bought her during their last trip to SeaWorld. "Why are you awake so early?" Daniel knelt down and pulled her into a hug, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Just couldn't sleep, Princess. Big day today." "Is today the day you have to go to court?" The question caught him off guard. He'd tried so hard to shield Lila from the legal proceedings, but 5-year-olds were more perceptive than adults often gave them credit for. She'd obviously picked up on the tension that had been building for weeks. "Yeah, sweetheart. It is." "Are you scared?" Daniel considered lying, offering false reassurance that everything was perfectly fine. But Lila deserved honesty, even if it had to be delivered in terms she could understand. "A little bit. But you know what? Sometimes being scared just means that something really important is happening, and that's okay." "Is it about me?" The directness of her question nearly broke his heart. "It's about making sure you have the best possible life with people who love you very much. Your mommy and I both want what's best for you, and sometimes grown-ups have to talk to judges to figure out how to make that happen." Lila was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the serious concentration she applied to everything that mattered to her. "Daddy, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Princess." "I heard Mommy and Marcus talking about me living with them all the time and only seeing you on weekends. I don't want that. I want to live with you too." Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. He'd known that Lila was happy during their time together, but hearing her explicitly state her preference was both heartening and heartbreaking. Whatever the adults decided, she would be affected by it for the rest of her childhood. "What you want matters, Lila. And no matter what happens today, you'll always be my little girl, and I'll always be your daddy. That will never change. Promise. Promise. More than all the fish in the sea. More than all the waves on the beach. More than all the stars in the sky." After getting Lila ready for school and dropping her off with his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd agreed to watch her during the hearing, Daniel drove to the courthouse with a mixture of hope and dread that felt like a physical weight in his chest. Elena was waiting for him on the steps, wearing her most professional suit, and carrying a briefcase full of documents that might or might not matter, depending on how Judge Lee had spent her night. "How are you holding up?" she asked as they climbed the courthouse steps together. "I'll be better in a few hours when this is all over." "Danny, I need to prepare you for the possibility that yesterday's conversation might not play out the way you think it will. Judges sometimes preview rulings that they change after further consideration. And if Sarah's lawyer has done his homework—" "What do you mean?" Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "Marcus Thornton has connections throughout the legal community. If he's heard rumors about your private meeting with Judge Lee, he might challenge her authority to preside over this case. An appellate motion filed this morning could delay everything by months." Daniel felt his newfound optimism begin to crumble. "Is that likely?" "I don't know, but I needed you to be aware of the possibility." As they entered the courthouse, Daniel noticed an unusual amount of activity around the family court wing. Reporters with cameras were clustered near the information desk, and several people he didn't recognize were checking the hearing schedule posted on the wall. "Elena, why are there reporters here?" Elena's expression darkened. "I was afraid of this. The story about your rescue of Judge Lee hit the news yesterday evening. Channel 8 ran a segment about the lifeguard hero and the judge, and by this morning it was trending on social media. Shit, does that hurt us? It creates pressure on Judge Lee to demonstrate that she's not showing favoritism. Public scrutiny makes it much harder for a judge to deviate from established precedent. They made their way to courtroom 3B, where Daniel's future would be decided. The normally quiet family courtroom was buzzing with an energy that felt more like a high-profile criminal trial than a routine custody dispute. Sarah and Marcus were already seated at the plaintiff's table with their attorney James Morrison, a silver-haired man with a reputation for aggressive litigation tactics. Morrison was known for turning family court proceedings into battles of attrition, dragging out cases until his opponents ran out of money or emotional stamina. Sarah looked nervous, glancing repeatedly at the reporters who'd managed to gain entry to the courtroom. She'd clearly dressed carefully for the hearing, conservative blue dress, minimal jewelry, hair, styled to project maternal responsibility. Beside her, Marcus radiated confidence, occasionally whispering to Morrison and checking his phone with the casual authority of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Daniel. Morrison approached their table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I hear you've become something of a local celebrity. Quite a coincidence pulling Judge Lee from the ocean just days before your hearing. Elena immediately moved to intercept. Are you suggesting something improper, James? Not at all. Just noting the remarkable timing. Of course, I'm sure Judge Lee will handle any potential conflicts of interest with her usual professionalism. The veiled threat was clear. Morrison was prepared to challenge Judge Lee's authority if the ruling didn't go his way. Daniel felt his stomach clench as he realized that the very thing that had given him hope might now be the weapon used to destroy it. At exactly 10 a.m., the bailiff called the courtroom to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Cassandra Lee. Judge Lee entered from her chambers wearing the same gray suit Daniel had seen yesterday, but her demeanor was different, more formal, more distant. She took the bench with the measured pace of someone who understood that every gesture was being scrutinized, every word recorded for potential appeal. Please be seated. We are here today for the matter of Hayes versus Thornton case number FC 2023-4891. This is a petition for modification of custody arrangements regarding the minor child, Lila Hayes. Her voice was crisp and professional, betraying none of the warmth Daniel had heard in their private conversation. He tried to catch her eye, but she was focused entirely on the documents before her. Before we proceed, I want to address what I assume will be the elephant in the room. As some of you may be aware, I was involved in an incident earlier this week in which Mr. Hayes rendered emergency assistance. I have consulted with the Judicial Ethics Board regarding any potential conflicts of interest, and they have determined that my continued participation in this case is appropriate, provided that my ruling is based solely on legal merit and the best interests of the child. Morrison immediately rose. Your Honor, I would like to request a brief recess to discuss this matter with my clients. Request denied, Counselor. The ethics review was thorough and this court is prepared to proceed. Do you have any formal motions regarding my authority to preside? Morrison hesitated, clearly calculating the risks of challenging a sitting judge in open court. No, Your Honor, not at this time. Very well. Ms. Vasquez, you may present your opening statement. Elena stood and walked to the center of the courtroom, her years of experience evident in her calm, measured approach. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about a father's right to maintain a meaningful relationship with his daughter, and a child's right to benefit from the love and guidance of both her parents. For the next 20 minutes, Elena methodically dismantled the arguments against Daniel's fitness as a parent. She presented character witnesses who testified to his devotion to Lila, teachers who spoke about the child's obvious affection for her father, and financial records that showed consistent child support payments, despite Daniel's modest income. Mr. Hayes has structured his entire life around being available for his daughter, Elena continued. He has chosen employment that allows him to attend her school events, her soccer games, her parent-teacher conferences. He has created a loving, stable environment in which Lila thrives intellectually and emotionally. Daniel watched Judge Lee's face throughout Elena's presentation, searching for any sign of the woman who'd promised him victory just 24 hours earlier. But her expression remained impassive, professional, unreadable. Morrison's opening statement was a masterpiece of subtle character assassination, without ever directly attacking Daniel's love for his daughter. He painted a picture of a man whose circumstances made him unsuitable for primary custody. Your Honor, no one questions Mr. Hayes's affection for his daughter. But love alone is not sufficient basis for custody arrangements. Children need stability, security, and the resources necessary for optimal development. Morrison presented financial analyses showing the stark differences between Daniel's modest apartment and the Thornton household's 5-bedroom home with a yard pool and dedicated study space. He brought in expert witnesses who testified about the importance of educational advantages, extracurricular opportunities, and family stability. Lila Hayes deserves the chance to attend the best schools, to participate in enrichment activities, to have college savings and family vacations and all the advantages that her mother and stepfather can provide. Mr. Hayes simply cannot offer these opportunities on a lifeguard's salary. The presentation was devastating in its clinical precision. Morrison never attacked Daniel personally, never suggested he was a bad father. Instead, he simply laid out the mathematical reality of their respective circumstances and invited the court to draw the obvious conclusion. When Morrison called Sarah to testify, Daniel watched his ex-wife walk to the witness stand with a mixture of sadness and resignation. They'd loved each other once, had dreamed together about the family they would build. Now she was about to explain in legal terms why he wasn't good enough to be their daughter's primary parent. Mrs. Thornton, can you describe your current living situation? We live in a 5-bedroom home in La Jolla. Lila has her own room, her own bathroom, and access to our backyard and swimming pool. We live in an excellent school district, and she'll be able to attend top-rated schools from kindergarten through high school. And can you describe the advantages this environment provides for Lila? Sarah's voice was steady, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. She has space to play, to have friends over, to pursue hobbies and interests. We can afford music lessons, sports activities, educational camps during the summer. Marcus and I can both attend her school events without worrying about missing work or losing income. Mrs. Thornton, do you believe Mr. Hayes loves your daughter? Yes, absolutely. Daniel is a devoted father who loves Lila very much. But do you believe he can provide the stability and opportunities she needs? Sarah's pause stretched across the courtroom like a held breath. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. I believe Daniel would give Lila everything he has. But what he has isn't enough to give her the future she deserves. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. This was the woman he'd married, the mother of his child, and she was telling a judge that his love wasn't sufficient to make him a proper parent. Elena's cross-examination focused on the strength of Daniel and Lila's relationship, the child's happiness during their time together, and the importance of maintaining strong bonds with both parents. But Morrison had done his work well. The case for custody modification was built on measurable advantages that were difficult to refute. When Daniel took the witness stand, he tried to convey the depth of his commitment to Lila without sounding defensive or desperate. He spoke about the constellation ceiling in her room, the books they read together, the soccer games where his cheering could be heard from the parking lot. Mr. Hayes, Elena asked during direct examination, What does being Lila's father mean to you? It means everything. It means getting up every morning with a purpose that's bigger than myself. It means making every decision based on what's best for her. It means being the person she can count on, no matter what. And how would a reduction in custody time affect your relationship with your daughter? Daniel looked directly at Judge Lee for the first time during the hearing. Your Honor, if I only saw Lila on weekends, I'd become a visitor in my daughter's life instead of her father. I'd miss the daily moments that make parenting meaningful, helping with homework, bedtime stories, being there when she wakes up from bad dreams. Those aren't luxuries. They're the foundation of our relationship. Morrison's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Without attacking Daniel personally, he highlighted every limitation, every financial constraint, every way in which Daniel's circumstances fell short of what Morrison characterized as optimal parenting conditions. Mr. Hayes, is it true that you work multiple jobs to make ends meet? Yes. And is it true that this sometimes requires you to work during hours when Lila is with you? Occasionally, yes. But I have arrangements with neighbors and family friends to ensure she's never unsupervised. So there are times when your daughter is being cared for by people other than yourself during your custody periods. Daniel felt the trap closing around him. Yes, but thank you, Mr. Hayes. No further questions. As the morning progressed, Daniel watched his case being systematically dismantled by the cold logic of family court precedent. Morrison presented statistical evidence about outcomes for children in single-parent versus two-parent households, financial analyses that highlighted the correlation between family income and educational achievement. Expert testimony about the importance of stability and consistency in child development. By lunch recess, Elena's face had taken on the grim expression of a lawyer who knew she was fighting a losing battle. They ate sandwiches in the courthouse cafeteria, while Elena tried to maintain optimism that Daniel could see she didn't feel. The afternoon session will be crucial, she said. Judge Lee will hear closing arguments, and then she'll render her decision. Based on what I saw this morning, I think we need to prepare for the possibility that Morrison's motion will be granted. What about yesterday? What about everything Judge Lee said in her chambers? Danny judges sometimes preview rulings that they change after hearing all the evidence. Morrison made a compelling case for custody modification. Judge Lee might have decided that the legal merits favor the other side. Daniel pushed his untouched sandwich around his plate, appetite destroyed by the growing certainty that he was about to lose the most important thing in his life. So what happens now? We present our closing argument as strongly as possible and hope that Judge Lee remembers what's really at stake here, a little girl's relationship with her father. The afternoon session began with Morrison's closing argument, a polished presentation that tied together all the morning's testimony into an overwhelming case for custody modification. He spoke about Lila's future opportunities, the advantages of the stable two-parent household, the importance of financial security in child development. Your Honor, this case isn't about punishing Mr. Hayes or diminishing his role in his daughter's life. It's about ensuring that Lila Hayes has access to the best possible opportunities for her growth and development. The evidence clearly shows that her primary residence should be with her mother and stepfather with appropriate visitation arrangements that maintain her relationship with her father. Elena's closing argument was passionate, but felt like a desperate attempt to overcome insurmountable odds. She spoke about love, dedication, and the irreplaceable bond between father and daughter. But in the sterile environment of family court, where decisions were based on measurable outcomes and statistical probabilities, emotional appeals carried limited weight. Your Honor, Daniel Hayes has proven himself to be an exemplary father who has sacrificed everything for his daughter's well-being. Lila thrives in his care, loves him deeply, and benefits immeasurably from their relationship. To reduce his role in her life would be to deprive both father and daughter of something precious and irreplaceable. When the closing arguments concluded, Judge Lee announced a 30-minute recess before rendering her decision. Daniel spent those 30 minutes in the courthouse bathroom staring at his reflection in the mirror and trying to prepare himself for the possibility that he was about to become a weekend father. Elena found him there 10 minutes before they were due back in court. "Danny, whatever happens in there, you need to know that you've been an amazing father. This case isn't about your worth as a parent. It's about a system that sometimes values the wrong things." They returned to the courtroom where the same crowd of reporters, family members, and court personnel waited in tense silence. Judge Lee entered precisely on time carrying a folder that contained Daniel's future. "Please be seated. In the matter of Hayes versus Thornton, I have carefully considered all testimony and evidence presented today. This case involves fundamental questions about child welfare, parental rights, and the best interests of a minor child." Daniel's heart was pounding so hard, he was certain everyone in the courtroom could hear it. Judge Lee's voice remained neutral, professional, giving no hint about which direction her ruling would go. "The petitioners have presented compelling evidence regarding the advantages they can provide to Lila Hayes: financial resources, educational opportunities, family stability, and access to enrichment activities that would undoubtedly benefit her development." Daniel felt his last hope beginning to slip away as Judge Lee systematically acknowledged the strength of Morrison's case. However, this court must consider not only what material advantages might be provided, but also what relationships and bonds would be affected by any modification of custody arrangements. Judge Lee paused, looking directly at Daniel for the first time since the hearing began. "The evidence shows that Lila Hayes has a profound and meaningful relationship with her father. She thrives in his care, demonstrates strong attachment to him, and clearly benefits from their time together. Mr. Hayes has proven himself to be a devoted, attentive, and capable parent who has structured his life around his daughter's needs." Daniel felt a spark of hope reignite, but he forced himself not to read too much into words that could be leading anywhere. While financial resources are certainly a factor in determining a child's best interests, they are not the only factor, nor necessarily the most important factor. This court must balance material advantages against the intangible but equally vital benefits of maintaining strong relationships with both parents. Judge Lee opened her folder and began reading from what was clearly a prepared statement. "After careful consideration of all evidence presented, this court finds that the current custody arrangement serves Lila Hayes' best interests and should be maintained. The petition for modification of custody is hereby denied." The words hit Daniel like a physical force, and for a moment he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Around him, the courtroom erupted in a buzz of conversation as reporters scribbled notes and spectators reacted to the unexpected ruling. "Furthermore," Judge Lee continued, "this court finds that both parents clearly love their daughter and want what's best for her. While the petitioners can provide certain material advantages, the respondent has demonstrated exceptional commitment to his daughter's well-being and has created a loving, stable environment in which she thrives." Morrison immediately rose. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that the court's reasoning be clarified. The evidence clearly showed." "Mr. Morrison, my reasoning is clear. This court will not remove a child from a loving, capable parent simply because another household can provide greater financial resources. Lila Hayes benefits from meaningful relationships with both her parents, and this court will not disrupt those relationships absent compelling evidence of unfitness which has not been presented." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as the full impact of the ruling settled over him. He'd won. Against all odds, against every precedent, against the overwhelming advantages of the other side, he'd won the right to continue being Lila's father. The current custody arrangement will remain in effect, Judge Lee concluded. Joint custody with equal time split between both parents. This court expects both parties to continue working together in their daughter's best interests. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Daniel found himself standing alone at the defendant's table, Elena having stepped away to handle procedural matters with the court clerk. Sarah and Marcus approached hesitantly, their expressions a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "Danny," Sarah said quietly, "I want you to know that this wasn't personal. I really believed we were doing what was best for Lila." Daniel nodded, too emotionally drained to feel anger toward his ex-wife. "I know, and I want you to know that I'll never try to interfere with Lila's relationship with you and Marcus. She loves you both, and that's important to me." Marcus extended his hand. "You're a good father, Daniel. I hope we can work together to give Lila the best possible life." As they shook hands, Daniel realized that the custody battle was over, but the real work of co-parenting was just beginning. They would all have to find ways to put aside their differences and focus on what was truly best for Lila. After the courthouse had mostly cleared, Daniel found himself alone with Judge Lee in the hallway outside her chambers. She had changed out of her judicial robes and looked more like the woman he'd pulled from the ocean than the intimidating figure who'd just delivered his salvation. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me, Mr. Hayes. Thank yourself for being the kind of father who deserved to win this case." "But you could have ruled the other way." Morrison made a strong argument. Judge Lee was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "You saved my life last week, but today you saved something else, my faith in what family court is supposed to accomplish. This case reminded me that justice isn't just about following precedent or applying statistical formulas. It's about protecting what matters most. And what matters most? Love. Real, unconditional, sacrificial love. The kind you show your daughter every day, and the kind I'd forgotten to look for in my courtroom." As they parted ways, Daniel drove through San Diego with a heart so full, it felt like it might burst. He picked up Lila from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment and swung her around in the parking lot, both of them laughing with joy. "Daddy, what happened at court? You look so happy." "I got to keep being your daddy, princess. Every day, just like always." "I knew you would," Lila said, with the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old who'd never doubted the outcome. "You're the best daddy in the whole world." That evening, as Daniel tucked Lila into her purple bedroom, with the constellation ceiling, she asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Daddy, will things be different now?" "No, sweetheart. Everything will be exactly the same. You'll still live with me and with Mommy and Marcus. You'll still go to school and play soccer and have all your favorite things. The only difference is that now we know for sure that's how it's going to stay." "Good," Lila said, snuggling into her pillow. "I like things just the way they are." As Daniel turned off the light and closed her door, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A storm, a rescue, a judge who'd remembered her humanity just in time to save a family. The events of the past week seemed almost too dramatic to be real, like something from a movie rather than ordinary life. But as he sat in his modest living room, listening to the sound of his daughter breathing peacefully in the next room, Daniel knew that the most extraordinary thing about their story wasn't the dramatic rescue or the surprising legal victory. It was the simple, profound truth that had sustained him through every challenge. Love was stronger than money, deeper than material advantages, and more powerful than any legal precedent. Judge Cassandra Lee had reminded him that sometimes the system worked exactly as it was supposed to, not because it followed rules and precedents, but because it recognized and protected what truly mattered: a father's love for his daughter, a child's need for both her parents, and the irreplaceable bonds that made families whole. The custody battle was over, but Daniel's real victory had been won years earlier in bedtime stories and soccer games, in homework help and constellation ceilings, in the daily choice to build his life around his daughter's happiness. Today's ruling had simply made official what had always been true: he was Lila's father, and nothing in the world could change that. The weeks following the custody hearing passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal after months of legal uncertainty. Daniel found himself savoring the simple routines that he'd once taken for granted: picking Lila up from school on Wednesday afternoons, helping with homework at the kitchen table Saturday morning soccer games, where his cheering could still be heard from the parking lot. The victory in Judge Lee's courtroom had given him something more precious than continued custody rights. It had given him the ability to be present in these moments without the constant fear that they might be his last. But the media attention from the rescue and subsequent hearing had created unexpected complications. The story of the lifeguard hero and Judge Ice had captured the public imagination in ways that made Daniel profoundly uncomfortable. Local news stations wanted interviews, social media had turned him into a hashtag, and complete strangers approached him on the beach to congratulate him on his legal victory. "Daddy, why did that lady want to take a picture with us?" Lila asked one morning as they walked to school, referring to a well-meaning woman who'd recognized Daniel from the news coverage. "Some people think what happened in court was interesting, Princess, but it's not really anyone else's business except ours." The attention had also affected Judge Cassandra Lee, though in more professional ways. The Judicial Ethics Board had launched a formal review of her decision to remain on the Hayes case, questioning whether her personal connection to Daniel had compromised her objectivity. Conservative legal blogs criticized her ruling as emotional rather than precedent-based, while progressive commentators praised her for prioritizing human relationships over financial advantages. Daniel learned about the ethics investigation from Elena, who'd called him on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the hearing. "They're not questioning the legal merit of her decision," Elena explained. "Your case was stronger than any of us realized once all the evidence was properly considered. But they're reviewing whether she should have recused herself from the beginning. What happens if they decide she made the wrong choice? Worst case scenario, your custody ruling could be overturned and the case would be assigned to a different judge for retrial. The possibility that their victory might be stripped away on procedural grounds felt like a cruel twist of fate. Daniel had saved Judge Lee's life, she'd saved his family, and now the very system they'd both served faithfully was threatening to punish them for choosing compassion over bureaucracy. That same week, Daniel received an unexpected phone call from Judge Lee herself. "Mr. Hayes, I hope I'm not overstepping by calling you directly. I wanted you to know about the ethics review, and I wanted to apologize if my decision to stay on your case has created additional stress for your family." "Judge Lee, you don't owe me any apologies. You did what you thought was right." "I did what I knew was right. But the system doesn't always reward doing the right thing, as you've learned firsthand." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Mission Hills, far from the courthouse and the beach, where their lives had first intersected. Judge Lee looked tired when she arrived, the weight of professional scrutiny evident in the lines around her eyes. "The ethics board will make their decision within the next 2 weeks," she said after ordering her coffee. "I want you to know that regardless of what they decide, I stand by my ruling in your case. The evidence supported maintaining your custody arrangement, and the law supports protecting strong parent-child relationships. What will happen to you if they find that you made the wrong choice?" Judge Lee was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee with the same mechanical precision Daniel remembered from their conversation weeks earlier. Best case, a formal reprimand in my file. Worst case, removal from the family court bench. Daniel felt a sick weight settle in his stomach. Because you refused to take my daughter away from me. Because I chose to see the human beings behind the case file instead of just following statistical precedent. Some of my colleagues think that was a mistake. Do you think it was a mistake? Judge Lee looked directly at him, and for a moment Daniel saw not the intimidating figure from the bench, but the vulnerable woman he'd pulled from the Pacific surf. Mr. Hayes, I've been a judge for 8 years. I've made hundreds of decisions that affected families, and I've followed established precedent in almost every case. I earned my reputation as Judge Ice by prioritizing legal consistency over individual circumstances. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But in all those years, I never once had a parent stop me in the grocery store to thank me for keeping their family together. I never once had a child draw me a picture showing their happiness. I never once felt like I'd actually made someone's life better instead of just applying legal formulas. What are you saying? I'm saying that if choosing to see you as a devoted father instead of just a case number costs me my position on the family court bench, then maybe that bench needs a different kind of judge anyway. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young woman Daniel didn't recognize, mid-20s, professionally dressed, carrying a recorder and notepad. Judge Lee, I'm Rebecca Martinez from the San Diego Union Tribune. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the Hayes custody case and the current ethics review. Judge Lee's expression immediately shifted back to professional neutrality. I have no comment on pending ethics proceedings, Ms. Martinez. But surely you can discuss the legal precedent for your ruling. Some legal experts are calling it a landmark decision that prioritizes emotional bonds over financial stability in custody determinations. Ms. Martinez, I cannot and will not discuss any case that came before my bench with the media. You'll need to direct your questions through the court's Public Information Office. The reporter turned to Daniel. Mr. Hayes, how do you feel about the possibility that Judge Lee's career might be damaged because of her decision? In your case, Daniel looked at Judge Lee, then back at the reporter. I feel like a woman who dedicated her career to protecting families shouldn't be punished for doing exactly that. After the reporter left, Judge Lee and Daniel sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. I shouldn't have involved you in this situation. The ethics review is my responsibility, and you shouldn't have to carry the burden of my professional choices. With respect, Judge Lee, you didn't involve me in anything. I made the choice to pull you out of the ocean, and you made the choice to rule based on what you thought was best for my daughter. Neither of us should apologize for doing what we believed was right. 2 weeks later, Daniel was at Pacific Beach working his afternoon shift when Elena called with news about the ethics board's decision. They've decided not to pursue disciplinary action against Judge Lee. Elena said, her voice carrying relief that Daniel could hear even over the sound of the waves. The board found that while the situation was unusual, there was no evidence that personal bias influenced her ruling. The legal merit of her decision was solid enough to withstand scrutiny. Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. So it's over, the ruling stands. The ruling stands. You get to keep being Lila's father, and Judge Lee gets to keep her position on the bench. Everyone wins. That evening, Daniel took Lila to the same stretch of beach where he'd pulled Judge Lee from the surf 6 weeks earlier. The October sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as father and daughter walked along the water's edge, Lila collecting shells, while Daniel reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that stormy morning. Daddy, look. Lila held up a perfect sand dollar, unbroken and smooth. It's so pretty. That's a special find, princess. You know what they say about sand dollars? What? They're supposed to bring good luck to people who find them. Lila examined the sand dollar carefully, then handed it to Daniel. You keep it, Daddy. You saved that lady's life, so you should have the good luck. Daniel knelt down beside his daughter, overwhelmed by the simple generosity of a 5-year-old who wanted to share her treasure with him. You know what, Lila, I think I already got all the good luck I need. What do you mean? I mean, I get to be your daddy. That's the luckiest thing that could ever happen to anyone. As they walked back toward the lifeguard station, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Hayes, this is Cassandra Lee. I wanted you to know that the Ethics Board has cleared me to continue presiding over family court cases. Thank you for reminding me why I became a judge in the first place. I hope you and Lila are well. Daniel showed the message to Lila, reading it aloud in simple terms she could understand. The nice judge lady wanted to say thank you for helping her remember how important families are. Are you going to write her back? Daniel thought for a moment, then typed, Judge Lee, thank you for seeing our family for what it really is. Because of you, Lila gets to keep both her parents and I get to keep being her father. That's a gift I can never repay. 6 months later, Daniel received an invitation that surprised him more than any legal document he'd ever seen. Judge Cassandra Lee was being honored by the San Diego Bar Association for her contributions to family law reform, and she'd specifically requested that Daniel and Lila attend the ceremony. The event was held at a downtown hotel filled with lawyers, judges, and legal professionals who represented the same system that had once threatened to tear Daniel's family apart. He felt out of place in his rented suit, but Lila was excited about the fancy party and had insisted on wearing her best dress, purple naturally, with sparkly shoes that clicked on the marble floors. Judge Lee's acceptance speech focused on the evolution of family law and the importance of considering human relationships alongside legal precedent. She spoke about the need for judges to see beyond case files to the real people whose lives were affected by their decisions. Family law isn't just about applying statutes and following precedent, she told the assembled crowd. It's about understanding that every case represents real people with real pain and real love. Our job isn't just to make legally sound decisions. It's to make decisions that protect what matters most in human relationships. After the ceremony, Judge Lee found Daniel and Lila in the reception area. She'd traded her formal judicial robes for an elegant black dress, but she still carried herself with the quiet authority that commanded respect. Mr. Hayes, I'm so glad you could come. And you must be Lila. Lila, who'd been somewhat overwhelmed by the formal atmosphere, immediately brightened at being addressed directly. Hi. My daddy says you're the judge who helped us stay together. Your daddy helped me remember something very important, that the best decisions come from understanding what really matters to people. Do you want to see my sand dollar? Lila asked, pulling the treasure from her small purse. Daddy says it brings good luck. Judge Lee examined the sand dollar with appropriate seriousness. It's beautiful, Lila, and I think your daddy might be right about the good luck. As the evening progressed, Daniel found himself in conversations with lawyers and judges who'd followed his case through the media coverage. Many of them expressed surprise at Judge Lee's ruling, but several admitted that it had made them reconsider their own approaches to family law. Your case has become something of a teaching tool in family court circles, one attorney told him. Law schools are using it as an example of how judges can consider emotional and relational factors alongside financial ones. The idea that his family's struggle had become a lesson for others felt surreal, but Daniel was gratified to know that something positive had emerged from their ordeal. Near the end of the evening, Judge Lee pulled Daniel aside for a private conversation. I wanted you to know that your case changed more than just your own situation, she said. I've modified my approach to custody cases, and several of my colleagues have done the same. We're looking more carefully at the quality of parent-child relationships, not just the material advantages different households can provide. That sounds like it could help a lot of families. It already has. Last month I ruled in favor of a single mother who was fighting her ex-husband's petition for custody modification. 2 years ago, I probably would have ruled differently, focusing on his superior financial resources rather than the strength of her relationship with their children. Judge Lee paused, watching Lila, who was entertaining a small group of lawyers with her explanation of how soccer cleats worked. You know, Mr. Hayes, when I was lying in that hospital bed after you pulled me from the ocean, I kept thinking about the moment when I stopped breathing. In that instant, none of my professional accomplishments mattered. My judicial reputation didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was whether someone would care enough to fight for my life. And you did. Without knowing who I was or what I could do for you, you fought for a stranger's life. That's the kind of character that makes someone a good parent, the instinct to protect and nurture regardless of personal cost. Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes as he understood the full impact of what she was saying. You ruled in my favor because you saw that I would fight for Lila the same way I fought for you. I ruled in your favor because the evidence showed you were an excellent father whose relationship with his daughter was worth protecting. The rescue just reminded me to look for that evidence instead of relying solely on financial comparisons. As the evening wound down and Daniel prepared to take Lila home, Judge Lee made one final comment that would stay with him for years. Mr. Hayes, I've spent my career making decisions about families, but I've never had a family of my own. Watching you with Lila tonight reminded me what I've been protecting all these years, not just legal relationships, but the love that makes families whole. 2 years later, Daniel received another unexpected phone call from Judge Lee, but this time the news was personal rather than professional. She was engaged to be married to Dr. Martinez, the physician who'd treated her after the rescue, and she wanted Daniel and Lila to attend the wedding. I know it might seem strange to invite you to such a personal event, she said during their phone conversation. But you were there at the beginning of this new chapter in my life, and it wouldn't feel complete without you. The wedding was a small, elegant affair held at a beachfront restaurant in La Jolla. Judge Lee, now Dr. Cassandra Martinez, looked radiant in a simple white dress, her face glowing with happiness that Daniel had never seen during their courthouse encounters. During the reception, she and Dr. Martinez announced that they were planning to adopt a child, having been matched with a pregnant teenager who'd chosen them as parents for her baby. We're nervous and excited and terrified, Dr. Martinez admitted to Daniel. Cassandra keeps saying she's spent years making decisions about other people's children, but she's never actually raised one herself. Daniel watched Judge Lee Cassandra as she danced with her new husband, and he could see the same fierce protectiveness in her eyes that he recognized in himself when he looked at Lila. She would be a good mother, he realized, because she'd learned to see children as individuals deserving of love and protection, rather than just legal categories. As the evening progressed, Lila, now 7 and increasingly confident in social situations, approached Cassandra with characteristic directness. Mrs. Judge Lady, are you going to have a baby? Cassandra knelt down to Lila's eye level, smiling at the formal title. We're going to adopt a baby sweetheart. That means we'll love and take care of a baby whose birth mother can't raise him herself. That's really nice, Lila said seriously. Babies need people to love them. My daddy says love is the most important thing in the whole world. Your daddy is a very smart man. I know. He saved your life and you saved our family. You're both heroes. The simple statement, delivered with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old, captured the truth that had connected their lives for over 2 years. They had saved each other in different ways. Daniel had pulled Cassandra from physical death in the ocean, and she had saved his family from legal death in the courtroom. 5 years after the rescue, Daniel stood on Pacific Beach watching Lila play in the surf under his careful supervision. At 10 years old, she was an accomplished swimmer, fearless in the water, that had once threatened to claim a stranger's life. The custody arrangement that Judge Lee had preserved continued to work well. Lila thrived, splitting her time between both parents, secure in the knowledge that she was loved by everyone in her extended family. Sarah and Marcus had eventually become true partners in co-parenting, and their initial antagonism had evolved into mutual respect and shared commitment to Lila's well-being. Marcus attended her soccer games alongside Daniel, and they developed an unlikely friendship based on their common devotion to the little girl who called them both Dad in different ways. Judge Cassandra Martinez had indeed become a mother, adopting not just one child, but eventually 3 siblings whose birth parents had been unable to care for them. Her transformation from Judge Ice to devoted mother had become legendary in family court circles, inspiring a generation of judges to consider the human impact of their decisions. She'd also established a foundation that provided legal assistance to single parents, fighting custody battles, ensuring that financial limitations wouldn't prevent devoted parents from maintaining relationships with their children. Daniel served on the foundation's board, using his experience to help other families navigate the complex intersection of law and love. On this particular afternoon, as Daniel watched Lila body surf in the gentle waves, his phone buzzed with a text from Cassandra. Daniel wanted you to know that I just ruled in favor of a single father in a custody case that was remarkably similar to yours. The other side had more money, but he had more heart. Some lessons never get old. Daniel smiled as he typed back, "Some rescues keep paying forward. Glad to hear it." Speaking of which came her response, "Miguel's soccer team is playing Lila's team next weekend. Think they're ready for the Hayes family cheering section." Daniel laughed out loud, remembering the first time Cassandra had heard his legendary game day enthusiasm. Her son Miguel, now 8, had inherited his adoptive mother's serious nature, but had developed his own passion for soccer that rivaled Lila's. "Tell Miguel we'll try to keep the noise level down to a dull roar. He wouldn't have it any other way. These kids have learned that being loved loudly is better than being loved quietly." As the sun began to set over the Pacific painting, the sky in the same brilliant colors Daniel remembered from the morning of the rescue, Lila ran up from the water's edge, her hair dripping and her face glowing with happiness. "Daddy, did you see that wave I caught? It was huge." "I saw it, Princess. You're getting braver every day." "That's because you taught me not to be scared of the water. You said the ocean can be dangerous, but it can also be beautiful if you know how to respect it." Daniel pulled her into a hug, marveling at how much wisdom his 10-year-old daughter had absorbed from their years of beach visits and swimming lessons. She understood in the intuitive way that children often did that the same waters that had nearly claimed Cassandra's life had also brought their family the salvation they'd needed. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think things happen for a reason? Like, do you think you were meant to save Judge Cassandra so she could help us stay together?" Daniel considered the question seriously, as he always did when Lila asked about the big mysteries of life. "I think sometimes good people make good choices, and those choices create opportunities for more good things to happen. I don't know if it was meant to be, but I'm grateful it worked out the way it did." "Me too. I like having both my families, and I like that Judge Cassandra became our friend." As they walked back toward the lifeguard station, where Daniel still worked now, as a supervisor training younger lifeguards, Lila spotted something in the sand near the water's edge. "Daddy, look." Another sand dollar. This one was smaller than the first one she'd found years earlier, but just as perfect and unbroken. She held it up to the setting sun, examining it with the same careful attention she'd given her first discovery. "What do you think this one means?" she asked. Daniel smiled, remembering their conversation about sand dollars and good luck from years earlier. "I think it means that good things keep happening to people who take care of each other. Should we give this one to Judge Cassandra? She helped take care of us." The suggestion was so perfectly Lila generous, thoughtful, and intuitive about the connections between people that Daniel felt his heart swell with pride. "I think that's a beautiful idea, Princess." The next weekend at Miguel's soccer game, Lila presented the sand dollar to Cassandra with a ceremony that drew the attention of parents from both teams. "This is for you," Lila announced, "because my daddy says sand dollars bring good luck, and you brought good luck to our whole family." Cassandra accepted the gift with the solemnity it deserved, understanding that in Lila's world sand dollars were precious treasures to be shared only with the most important people. "Thank you, Lila. I'll treasure this always." "Do you know what the best part is?" Lila continued, unaware that she had an audience of amused parents. "Now we both have sand dollars, so we both have good luck, and we can share it with other people who need help." Daniel watched the exchange from the sidelines, marveling at his daughter's ability to distill complex relationships into simple truths. In her 10-year-old wisdom, she'd identified exactly what had made their story special, not the dramatic rescue or the legal victory, but the way good fortune had been shared and multiplied among people who cared for each other. As Miguel's team scored their first goal and the crowd erupted in cheers, Daniel found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A storm, a rescue, a custody battle, and years of friendship that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. None of it had been planned or expected, but all of it had led to this two families cheering together for their children, connected by bonds that transcended legal relationships or biological ties. Judge Cassandra Martinez caught his eye from across the field and raised her coffee cup in a small salute. Daniel raised his own cup in response, a simple gesture that acknowledged everything they'd been through together, and everything that had grown from that single moment of choice in the Pacific surf. The game continued around them, children pursuing their dreams on the grass, while parents celebrated every small victory and offered comfort for every minor defeat. It was Daniel realized exactly what family was supposed to be: not perfect, not always easy, but always there when you needed it most. As the final whistle blew and Miguel's team celebrated their victory, Lila ran over to Daniel with grass stains on her uniform and joy written across her face. "Daddy, Miguel's mom says we can all go get ice cream together. Can we please?" Daniel looked at the mixed group of parents and children, former strangers who'd become extended family through the simple act of showing up for each other week after week, game after game. "Of course, Princess. That sounds perfect." And it was perfect in the imperfect way that real life was perfect, messy and complicated, and full of unexpected connections that turned strangers into family, and moments of crisis into opportunities for grace. Years later, when people asked Daniel about the rescue that had changed his life, he would tell them that the most remarkable thing wasn't pulling a drowning woman from the ocean. The most remarkable thing was learning that sometimes when you save someone else, you end up saving yourself. And sometimes when you think you're fighting for your own survival, you're actually fighting for something much bigger: the chance to be part of a story where love wins, where justice prevails, and where ordinary people become heroes simply by refusing to give up on what matters most. The Pacific Ocean continued its eternal rhythm, against the shore, indifferent to human drama, but somehow central to this story of rescue and redemption. In its depths, it had nearly claimed a life. On its surface, it had tested the courage of a man who chose to risk everything for a stranger. And on its beaches, it had provided the setting for a friendship that would last a lifetime. Some stories end with dramatic revelations or surprising twists. This one ended with something better. The quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a family preserved, and the knowledge that sometimes the most extraordinary thing about ordinary people is their capacity to save each other. Daniel Hayes never stopped being a lifeguard, and he never stopped being grateful for the storm that had brought Judge Cassandra Lee into his life. Because on that gray October morning, when he dove into the surf to save a stranger, he'd had no idea that he was really diving toward his family's salvation. The rescue was over, but the story it had started would continue for generations. In the children who learned that love was stronger than money, in the judges who remembered to see people instead of case files, and in the simple truth that heroes don't wear capes. They carry their children through storms, they dive into dangerous waters for strangers, and they never ever give up on what matters most.